We've all heard it, right? The idea that being bilingual is like a superpower for your brain, that it actually makes you smarter. It's a really popular belief, but is it always true? Well, today we're going to put that idea to the test with a fascinating study from a place you probably wouldn't expect, rural Russia. All right, let's get into it. So let's start with the big question right up front. We pretty much assume that speaking more than one language gives students a leg up in school, don't we? I mean, it just seems to make sense. But what happens when you actually look at the data? You know, this popular idea actually has a name. It's called the bilingual advantage. So the thinking goes that juggling multiple languages is like a workout for your brain, strengthening the parts that handle things like problem solving and focus. And that brain boost is supposed to lead directly to better grades. It's a really compelling theory, and it's exactly what our source material set out to investigate. Now, to really put this idea under the microscope, researchers went to a corner of the world that turned out to be the perfect real-world test case, rural Russia. Let's dig into why this particular region was such an ideal place for this kind of study. First off, you've got to understand the sheer scale of the linguistic diversity here. We're not talking about just a few different languages. Russia is home to 97 distinct indigenous languages. That's an incredibly complex tapestry of multilingual communities. So this isn't some small niche issue. It's a massive nationwide reality. And, you know, this kind of diversity doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's become a really hot-button political issue. Back in 2017, President Putin made this statement, basically putting Russian first and framing the education in minority languages as a potential problem. This quote really sets the scene for a very high-stakes debate going on inside the country. So this political pressure created a very specific fear, especially among government officials. They worried that speaking a minority language at home or learning it in school might actually hurt a student's performance. The big focus was this thing called the Unified State Exam, or USE. It's this massive, high-stakes test you have to pass to graduate, and it's only offered in Russian. The whole debate really revolved around that concern. Okay, so that's the backdrop. And it's right in the middle of all this that researchers went to the rural Chuvash Republic. They surveyed over 900 students, mostly from two ethnic groups, the Chuvash and the Tatars. And what's so amazing about this community is that being bilingual or even trilingual, well, that's just normal life. It's the norm, not the exception, which makes it the perfect place to see what's really going on. So based on everything we think we know about the bilingual advantage, the researchers went in with a pretty straightforward hypothesis. The students who spoke Chuvash or Tatar at home on top of Russian would get better grades. It's the logical expectation, right? More languages, better brain skills, higher scores. Makes perfect sense. But that is not what they found. Not even close. The results were genuinely surprising, and they challenge a lot of the conventional wisdom on this topic. Yeah, so that whole idea of a bilingual boost, it just got thrown right out the window. The study found no significant connection, not positive, not negative, between speaking a minority language and how well these kids did in school. The advantage they were looking for, it just wasn't there. To be really specific, the researchers said they found only weak evidence for any kind of positive link. In this particular rural setting, being bilingual or trilingual just didn't seem to give students a measurable academic edge. And this is a really big deal because it flies in the face of a lot of other studies, which were often done in very different, more urban environments. Okay, so if language wasn't the magic ingredient, then what was? What actually mattered? This is where the study gets even more interesting because it didn't just bust a myth, it also pointed to the things that really predicted who would be successful. And when you look at the data, the answer is just crystal clear. How many languages a student spoke? Not significant. What did matter? Things like their family's socioeconomic status, the number of books in their home, and their gender. Those were the things that made a real difference. So let's just break that down. The factors that kept showing up as predictors for better grades were 1. The family's financial situation, 2. What sociologists sometimes call cultural capital, in this case measured by something as simple as the number of books at home, 3. Being a girl, girls consistently had higher grades, and to a lesser extent, a student's health and whether they went to a better funded school also played a role. Notice what's not on that list? Language. And get this even caught the researchers off guard. They kind of expected that socioeconomic status wouldn't be as big of a deal in a rural community, where you might think wealth is more evenly spread out than in a big city. But they were wrong. Even out here, it turned out to be a massively important factor in a student's success. So what does all this mean? Well, these findings basically force us to reframe the entire debate. The whole conversation gets turned on its head. The focus shifts away from what language kids are speaking and lands squarely on opportunity. And that leads to the study's really powerful final conclusion. That initial fear, the one that started this whole thing, the idea that minority languages were a threat to students' grades, was found to be completely, 100% baseless. Speaking Chuvash or Totter at home did no harm, period. But the researchers don't just stop there. They offer a very clear path forward. They say, look, policymakers are worried about the wrong problem. Instead of stressing about language, they should be focused on making the education system more fair for students from different economic backgrounds. And that brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. The bilingual advantage might not be the universal superpower we thought it was, at least not here. But maybe more importantly, the idea of a bilingual disadvantage is a total myth. The real barrier holding students back isn't the language they speak with their family, it's inequality. And so this leaves us with one last big question that goes way beyond rural Russia. When we talk about improving schools and helping kids succeed, are we actually focusing our energy, our time, and our money on solving the right problems? It's something to think about.